There exists a form of power that operates beneath the surface of words, a sovereignty that announces nothing yet transforms everything. You have felt it, perhaps, that quiet knowing when something within you shifts without declaration, when you remove what no longer serves not through confrontation, but through an invisible withdrawal that leaves no trace except the lightness in your chest. This is not the power of those who shout their boundaries or perform their healing for an audience. This is the silent authority of a woman who has walked through her own underworld and returned with a truth that needs no validation. What unfolds in the space between who you were taught to be and who you truly are contains the entire architecture of your liberation. The woman who removes silently does not do so out of weakness or avoidance. She operates from a place Carl Jung identified as the individuated self, that center of psychological wholeness where external noise loses its grip and internal clarity becomes the only compass that matters. She has learned that true strength is not measured by what she can endure, but by what she chooses to release. And in this choosing, there exists a mystery, 7 specific removals that reconstruct the soul without the world ever witnessing the reconstruction. The wisdom carried in these removals is not taught in any manual of self-improvement. It emerges from the depths of lived experience, from the moment when endurance transforms into discernment and the chronic pattern of self-abandonment finally breaks. You are about to encounter 7 movements of consciousness that separate the woman who survives from the woman who thrives in her own truth. Each removal is an act of psychological surgery performed in the silence of your own becoming. Consider for a moment the weight you carry that was never yours to begin with. How much of your daily existence is shaped by the expectation others have projected onto your being? Carl Jung spoke extensively about projection, that unconscious process where people cast their unlived lives, their rejected shadows, their unfulfilled desires onto those around them. For the woman who has spent decades being the mirror in which others see what they need to see, this becomes a second skin so familiar she forgets it is not her own. The mother who needed you to be successful so she could feel worthy. The partner who required you to be endlessly available so he would not face his own emptiness. The culture that demanded you shrink your wisdom into palatable silence so the fragile egos around you would not crack. You have carried these projections like a cloak woven from the expectations of everyone except yourself. The first removal is the shedding of this cloak. It happens without announcement, without confrontation, without the drama that ego demands. One day you simply stop contorting yourself to fit the shape others have carved for you. You no longer explain why you said no, why you chose differently, why their disappointment in your authenticity is not your emergency to resolve. This is what Jung called the death of the persona, that social mask constructed for acceptance, and its removal can feel like dying because in many ways it is. You are allowing a false self to dissolve, and in that dissolution there will be people who accuse you of changing, of becoming difficult, of no longer being the woman they could rely on to betray herself for their comfort. Let them speak. The queen who removes projections silently understands that she owes no one an explanation for her return to herself. What replaces the space where projections once lived? At first, nothing. And that nothing can be terrifying because you have spent so long being filled with other people's needs that emptiness feels like annihilation. But stay with it. In Jungian terms, this is the encounter with the void, the necessary descent into the unknown self before the true self can emerge. You may notice relationships shifting, some dissolving entirely. Not because you did anything wrong, but because they were built on your willingness to be someone you were not. This is not loss. This is liberation mistaken for loss by those who have not yet learned that authenticity costs you everyone who loved your compliance. Now the internal landscape begins to shift in ways that external eyes cannot perceive. The second removal rises from depths even quieter than the first, touching the very foundation of how you have learned to relate to your own existence. For generations, women have been taught that their value is measured by their capacity to absorb blame, to carry guilt like a badge of martyrdom that proves their goodness. You learned this perhaps from a mother who learned it from hers, an ancestral inheritance of self-punishment disguised as virtue. Jung understood what he called the complex, those clusters of emotionally charged associations that operate autonomously in the psyche, driving behavior without conscious awareness. The guilt complex in women is one of the most insidious, whispering that you are responsible not just for your own choices, but for the pain of everyone who ever encountered you. The Queen removes this narrative without ceremony. She begins to distinguish between genuine responsibility and the chronic guilt that has colonized her inner world since childhood. Responsibility says, I acknowledge my part in this situation and I will act accordingly. Guilt says everything that goes wrong is fundamentally my fault and I must atone endlessly to prove I deserve to exist. Do you see the difference? One is grounded in reality, the other in a wound so old you mistake it for identity. When you remove the narrative of guilt, you are not abandoning accountability. You are refusing to carry the emotional debris of situations you did not create, patterns you inherited, and the disappointments of people who expected you to heal wounds only they can heal. This removal often coincides with a profound recognition about family systems and what Jung referred to as the collective unconscious. You begin to see that you have been loyal not to love, but to suffering. Faithful not to your own truth, but to ancestral patterns of self-sacrifice that predate your birth. Your grandmother, perhaps, who stayed silent through abuse. Your mother who gave until there was nothing left and called it devotion. The lineage of women who believed that their pain made them holy. You carry their legacy in your cellular memory, and until you consciously choose otherwise, you will repeat their patterns with eerie precision. These unconscious loyalties operate beneath the threshold of awareness, shaping your choices in ways you cannot see until you step far enough back to recognize the pattern. You choose partners who require sacrifice because sacrifice feels like love. You remain in situations that diminish you because leaving would betray the family script that says endurance equals worthiness. You silence your own needs because your mother silenced hers, and to do differently would be to suggest that her suffering was unnecessary, a truth too painful to bear. So you suffer too, and call it loyalty. You diminish too, and call it virtue. You disappear too, and call it love. But individuation, as Jung made clear, demands that you break the chain. Not out of cruelty or disrespect for those who came before, but out of recognition that their wounds do not have to become your destiny. You can honor the struggles of your ancestors without repeating them. You can acknowledge the pain that shaped your lineage without allowing it to shape your future. This is the sacred betrayal, the necessary treason that allows a new pattern to emerge. When you remove these invisible loyalties, you may feel the weight of generations pressing against your choice, the ghostly voices of all the women who could not choose differently, whispering that you are selfish, that you are abandoning the family, that you are breaking something sacred. But you are not breaking anything, except the cycle of inherited suffering. And that breaking is the most loving thing you could possibly do, not just for yourself, but for all the daughters who will come after you. The third removal is the dissolution of these invisible loyalties that keep you tethered to collective suffering. To remove them is to commit what feels like a betrayal, a treason against the tribe, because individuating means stepping out of the collective pattern that your family has maintained for generations. Jung warned that individuation is the loneliest journey because it requires you to disappoint those who raised you, to refuse to carry forward the torch of their unhealed wounds. The queen who removes these unconscious allegiances does so with a trembling heart, knowing that her family may never understand why she no longer participates in the familiar dance of codependence. But she also knows that freedom is not possible while loyalty to dysfunction remains intact. What happens when you can no longer be relied upon to stay small so others feel safe? The ripple effect moves through your relational world like a stone dropped in still water, and the fourth removal emerges organically from this new center of gravity you are establishing. You begin to notice with startling clarity which relationships are built on genuine reciprocity and which exist because you have been the sole nourisher, the eternal giver, the one who pours endlessly, while others merely drink. Jung spoke of psychic energy and how it flows between people, and in relationships that are energetically unequal, One person becomes the battery that powers the connection, while the other remains perpetually uncharged except through extraction. You have been that battery. You have sustained friendships where you do all the reaching out, all the emotional labor, all the remembering and caring, while the other person simply shows up when convenient and disappears when you need them. You have been in romantic partnerships where you gave your presence, your attention, your body, your time, while receiving crumbs of affection disguised as commitment. You have poured yourself into family dynamics where your well-being was never considered as important as maintaining the appearance of harmony. The Queen removes these relationships not with drama or confrontation, but with a quiet withdrawal that needs no explanation. She simply stops being available. She stops initiating. She stops bending herself into shapes that accommodate everyone else's comfort, while her own soul suffocates. In Jungian psychology, this pattern of chronic giving without receiving reflects an identification with the archetypal caregiver at the expense of the self. You become the eternal mother, the bottomless well, the unconditional nurturer, and in doing so, you lose touch with your own needs, your own limits, your own right to be cared for in return. The psyche cannot sustain this imbalance indefinitely. Eventually, either you consciously choose to restore equilibrium, or your body and mind will force the issue through exhaustion, illness, or breakdown. The woman who removes energetically unequal relationships before reaching collapse is not being selfish. She is practicing the kind of self-preservation that patriarchal conditioning taught her to view as selfishness, but which is actually sanity. There is a particular pain in recognizing that some people in your life have only ever related to you as a resource. They do not see you as a full person with your own interior world, your own struggles, your own need for support. They see you as the one who handles things, who understands, who never complains, who is always there. When you stop abandoning yourself, they experience it as you abandoning them. This is projection at its most insidious. The Queen, who has done the internal work necessary to honor her own energetic boundaries, knows that she cannot explain this to people who have never examined their own relational patterns. She knows that her withdrawal will be misunderstood, that she will be labeled difficult, or changed, or no longer herself. She allows this misunderstanding without attempting to correct it, because she has learned that those who benefit from your self-sacrifice will never validate your choice to stop sacrificing. They cannot afford to validate it. Their own unexamined patterns depend on your continued participation in a dynamic that serves them at your expense. This removal is perhaps the most visible because absence is noticed, and those who benefited from your depletion will demand to know why you have changed. They will accuse you of being selfish, of abandoning them, of becoming cold. Let them accuse. The truth is that you have not become cold, you have become warm toward yourself, and that warmth no longer extends to those who only approached you when they needed something drained from your reserves. The mature woman understands that some connections were never meant to last a lifetime, but only to serve a phase of growth that has now completed. She blesses them silently and walks away, not out of bitterness but out of self-preservation that is no longer negotiable. As you clear the external relational field of energetic imbalance, an internal shift begins to occur that is even more profound. The fifth removal touches the very core of how you have constructed your sense of worth, that edifice built from external validation that has defined you since childhood. You were taught to seek approval, to measure your value by how others responded to you, to perform your existence for an invisible audience whose applause determined whether you deserved to take up space. Jung called this the inflation of the ego through external identification, where the sense of self becomes entirely dependent on mirroring from the outside world. When that mirroring is withdrawn, the ego collapses into shame and worthlessness. The Queen, who has walked through her own psychological underworld, no longer performs for this imaginary audience. She removes the need for recognition, not by pretending it does not matter, but by building a relationship with her own internal witness. That part of the psyche Jung identified as the self that observes without judgment and knows your worth independent of anyone's opinion. This removal is subtle because it happens entirely in the private chambers of your consciousness. Externally, you may look the same, but internally, you have stopped asking the world to tell you who you are. You no longer need someone to validate your experience for it to be real. You no longer require praise to feel that what you created has value. You no longer collapse into invisibility when no one notices you. Your worth has become an internal fact rather than an external negotiation. This does not mean you become indifferent to connection or immune to the warmth of being seen. It means you are no longer dependent on it for your psychological survival. There is a difference between enjoying appreciation and needing it to breathe. The woman who has removed the necessity of external recognition breathes on her own now, and that breath is steady, deep, and entirely hers. Consider how much of your life energy has been spent managing the perceptions of others. How many decisions have you made, not because they aligned with your truth, but because they would generate approval? How many times have you silenced your authentic response in favor of the response that would keep you safe from judgment? The persona, in Jungian terms, is necessary for navigating social reality. We all wear masks appropriate to different contexts. But when the mask becomes so fused with your identity that you no longer remember what your actual face looks like, you have sacrificed your soul for social acceptance. And that sacrifice, made over decades, leaves you feeling like a stranger to yourself. The removal of the need for external validation often begins with small moments of rebellion. You say what you actually think in a conversation instead of parroting back what you know the other person wants to hear. You make a choice that serves your well-being even though you know someone will be disappointed. You stop performing an image of yourself that was designed to make others comfortable and allow your raw, unedited humanity to be visible. These moments are terrifying at first because you have spent so long believing that your acceptability depends on your performance. But something remarkable happens when you stop performing. You discover that the people who matter, the ones capable of genuine connection, do not need you to be perfect or impressive or always put together. They want to know the real you, the messy one, the uncertain one, the one who sometimes fails and sometimes doubts and sometimes has no idea what she is doing. And those who cannot tolerate your authenticity were never really seeing you anyway. They were relating to the image you projected, and when that image drops, so do they. This is not loss. This is clarity. The queen who has removed the need for constant recognition can finally discern who loves her for who she is versus who loves her for what she provides, how she makes them feel, or the role she plays in their personal mythology. And in that discernment, she becomes free to build relationships based on truth rather than performance, depth rather than appearance, mutual recognition rather than one-sided visibility. Notice how as you release the grip of external validation, you simultaneously release another burden that has exhausted you for decades. The sixth removal is the laying down of battles that were never yours to fight. You have been a warrior, yes, but not always for your own liberation. You have fought for others, rescued others, absorbed their conflicts, carried their burdens, believed that your value was proven by how much you could endure on behalf of people who never asked you to suffer for them. Jung spoke of the savior complex, that shadow aspect where helping others becomes a way to avoid facing your own unintegrated pain. As long as you are busy saving, you do not have to confront the parts of yourself that still need saving. The queen removes herself from battlefields that do not belong to her. She stops intervening in conflicts between others. She stops trying to fix people who are not ready to be fixed. She stops absorbing the emotional chaos of those around her, as if it is her responsibility to transmute their suffering. This removal is an act of profound wisdom because it recognizes that everyone is on their own journey of individuation, and your interference, however well-intentioned, may actually prevent them from encountering the challenges they need to grow. Compassion does not require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Real compassion often looks like stepping back and allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices without your intervention. When you remove yourself from these battles, You may be accused of being cold, of not caring, of abandoning those who need you. But the truth is that you have finally distinguished between genuine support and codependent enmeshment. You have realized that fighting someone else's battles while neglecting your own is not nobility, it is avoidance. And the queen who has returned to her own territory understands that her primary responsibility is to her own soul's evolution, not to the emotional comfort of those who would keep her distracted from that sacred work. The savior complex, when examined through a Jungian lens, reveals itself as a defense mechanism against your own vulnerability. As long as you are busy rescuing others, you do not have to face the parts of yourself that feel helpless or in need of rescue. You project your own wounded inner child onto others and attempt to save them as a way of symbolically saving the part of yourself you have never learned to hold. This is why the pattern of chronic helping often leaves you feeling depleted and resentful. You are giving from a wound, not from wholeness, and no amount of giving from that place will ever fill what is empty inside you. There is also a hidden arrogance in believing you can save others. It assumes you know better than they do what they need, that your intervention is more powerful than their own capacity for growth. Jung understood that the individuation process cannot be done for someone else. Each person must encounter their own darkness, face their own shadow, integrate their own rejected aspects. When you interfere in that process, you may actually delay their development. Your withdrawal from their battle is not abandonment. It is respect for their autonomy and their journey. The seventh and final removal emerges from all the others, a culmination of the previous 6 dissolutions that brings you to the deepest recognition of all. You remove the illusion that you can control the destiny of anyone beyond yourself. For years, perhaps decades, you have tried to shape the lives of those around you, believing that if you just did the right thing, said the right words, gave enough love, enough attention, enough sacrifice, you could save them from their pain. You have tried to control your children's choices so they would not suffer. You have tried to manage your partner's emotions so the relationship would survive. You have tried to fix your parents so they would finally see you. And in all of this controlling, you have exhausted yourself while changing nothing. Jung was clear about the principle of individuation. Each soul must walk its own path, and no amount of external intervention can substitute for the internal work that only the individual can do. The queen who removes the need to control others is not giving up on them. She is honoring their autonomy, their right to their own mistakes, their journey toward their own wholeness. She understands that her attempts to control were never about love, but about her own fear of helplessness, her inability to tolerate watching others suffer, her deep-seated belief that she must be indispensable or she has no value. When she removes this need, she releases everyone, including herself, from a prison of false responsibility. The illusion of control is perhaps the most exhausting burden you have carried because it is fundamentally impossible. You cannot control another person's choices, emotional responses, or life trajectory, no matter how much you try. The energy you have spent attempting to manage the unmanageable could have built empires in your own inner world. The woman who recognizes this does not become passive or uncaring. She becomes discerning. She distinguishes between what is hers to tend and what belongs to others. She offers support when asked, but does not insert herself uninvited. There is a grief that accompanies this removal. It is the grief of accepting your own powerlessness over the people you love most. You must watch them make choices you believe will hurt them. You must witness their pain without being able to take it away. This is excruciating for the woman who has spent her life believing that love means protecting others from pain. But mature love understands that pain is often the greatest teacher. The queen who releases control does so with tears in her eyes and trust in her heart, trusting that each person has their own relationship with life, their own soul's curriculum that she cannot see from her limited vantage point. This final removal is perhaps the most liberating because it returns you fully to yourself. You are no longer scattered across the lives of others, no longer fragmented by the impossible task of living for everyone except yourself. You gather your energy back from all the places you left it, all the people you tried to save, all the situations you tried to control, and you bring it home to the only place it ever belonged. Your own being, your own becoming, your own sacred individuation. What remains after these 7 silent removals is not emptiness, but essence. You discover that beneath all the projections you carried, the guilt you absorbed, the loyalties you inherited, the unequal relationships you sustained, the validation you sought, the battles you fought, and the control you attempted, there was always a center of quiet knowing. That center is what Jung called the self, and it has been waiting patiently for you to strip away everything that is not you, so that what is you can finally breathe. The queen who has completed these removals does not announce her sovereignty. She simply embodies it. She moves through the world with a presence that needs no words, because it carries the weight of someone who has faced her own depths and returned with the pearl of self-knowledge clutched in her hand. This is the vibration of a woman who has stopped explaining herself. She is no longer available for relationships that drain her. She no longer participates in family patterns that diminish her. She no longer seeks approval from those who never truly saw her. She no longer fights wars that steal her peace. She no longer tries to control outcomes she was never meant to control. She has removed silently what needed to be removed, and in that removal, she has found what was always there beneath the noise. Her own light, her own truth, her own irreplaceable presence. If these words have touched something in you that has been waiting to be named, then you are already in the process of your own silent removals. The queen within you does not need permission to begin. She needs only your willingness to listen to the quiet knowing that has been whispering beneath all the noise of obligation and expectation. Subscribe to continue this journey of conscious becoming. Share in the comments which of these 7 removals speaks most urgently to your soul right now. And remember that the greatest transformations happen not in the loudness of declaration, but in the sacred silence of a woman who has finally chosen herself.